Hello, everyone. My name is George McCalman. It is a thrill to be here with you this evening. I am so thrilled to introduce Alison Bechdel to all of you to be in conversation this evening. Alison, how are you?
I'm great, George. I'm very happy to be here chatting with you.
Yes, it's a thrill. I want to introduce everyone that both knows and doesn't know who we are, who you are, um, to orient the conversation. And so you have a book that just came out called The Secret to Superhuman Strength. And I would love you to describe this book to the uninitiated, just so everyone knows what we're going to be talking about.
Okay, this is a graphic memoir about, on the surface, my life in exercise, but it kind of delves into a lot of other more metaphysical than physical subjects.
Mm-hmm. So the book in and of itself, I've described this book several times to people who haven't heard of it. And the graphic novel, the graphic memoir format still requires some explanation. And
Yes.
so it seems to confuse a lot of people. And if you can explain the format a little bit for someone who's picking up the book who isn't familiar with the format on the inside.
It's a comic book. It's basically a comic book, a thick one.
Yes.
It's a comic book with a lot of words. I mean, my graphic memoir / novels are kind of on the wordy side for comics, but they're still comics, and it's just a comic book.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing to be afraid of.
Yes. So I would love to share with folks a few slides that you have to show them a little bit of what the interior, the visuals of the book looks like.
Okay, I have a little 3-minute thing where I'll show pictures and also kind of talk as I go.
Great.
and then we'll come back.
Great.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so the title of the book comes from my childhood fascination with the bodybuilding and self-defense ads in my comic books, with Charles Atlas and his leopard skin trunks. And after years of reading those ads in the comic book, I finally sent away for this thing, The Secret to Superhuman Strength, which I don't think I need to tell you did not impart to me the secret to superhuman strength, but I remained very fascinated with the idea of that. And over the course of my life, I have done a lot of different kinds of exercise, and I've done it for lots of reasons, not just to cultivate strength. I feel like I get all kinds of mental and emotional and psychological and even metaphysical benefits from exercise. And I'm a person who gets very stuck in my head, and physical activity really helps me to not do that so much.
Mm-hmm.
The book goes through my life in chronological order, so it also kind of tracks these various fitness trends that I was following, kind of at the same time everyone else was doing these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I also talk about the way this feeling of working out very intensely, like the feeling of runner's high or the heightened focus that you can get into that's a kind of a trance,
Yes.
is very similar to the feeling of being caught up in a creative project. And for me, that feeling came much more easily to me as a child than it does now. It's much harder to access that as an adult. So another thing I do in this book is I look at some other writers and their relationships to their creativity. I look at the British Romantics, Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William and Dorothy Wordsworth, who were always out like wandering the hills, and their experience in nature really informed the stuff they were writing. And those people really influenced the American transcendentalists, Margaret Fuller and Ralph Waldo Emerson, both of whom had these kind of crazy ecstatic experiences in nature of feeling their selves disappear that I love. Emerson said he felt like a transparent eyeball, like his self just fell away. Margaret Fuller felt like she understood that the idea of the self was suffering, which I thought was pretty perceptive. She realized this one day when she was 21. I also read about Jack Kerouac and the hike he did with Gary Snyder when they hiked a mountain in the Sierras that he writes about in his book, The Dharma Bums. There's my own efforts, my sort of sporadic efforts at learning to meditate and learning about Buddhism myself as I try to figure out, try to grasp this idea that ourselves are not real. Mm-hmm. But it's very slow going. It is nothing like the psilocybin mushroom trip I had in my youth. On that day, I really got it that myself was not real, and that it was my belief in that separate self that kept me cut off from everything else in the universe. So I can get little glimpses of that psilocybin feeling too in my exercise life. Doing things like skiing, running, just being in the woods around my house is very, very important to me. I live out in the country and I can just go out and stick my head under a waterfall when I need to. So that is the end of my slides, just to give you a sense of what the book looks like and some of the stuff I talk about.
This is great. Thank you so much for the visual walkthrough. I think it'll help. And the conversations I'm going to have with you are going to go in two different directions. I'm interested in your process as an artist and writer myself. I am fascinated. I am internally consumed with how people work. And so I'm fascinated by the different ways that people work creatively. And so I'm interested in how you actually made the book. But I'm also fascinated by the fact that you place a lot of your process of making the book in the book. And so I'm going to be kind of following these two threads. And so I'm going to start off with a nerdy question. I'm going to ask you a lot of nerdy questions.
Okay, lay it on me, George.
How did you start making this book? I actually want to explain this process to the average reader, because people buy books. Books are a universal form, but most people don't think about the process of how books are actually made. And so I love, how did you start in this process? If you can give us just a little walkthrough.
I like that you said, how is this book made? I think made is like the key word when you're talking about comics, because I really do have to grapple with the physical book in a way that I don't think people who just write with words do. Like they just hand it off and the book designer, pours all that text into the template and it goes from the left-hand page to the right-hand page, and it's just kind of automatic. I mean, I'm sure I'm vastly oversimplifying what book designers do, but I'm actually touching all those pages. I'm like drawing every square inch of every page, every left-hand page, every right-hand page, every page turn. I've got to think about what's going to be the image that you see when you turn the page. And so it's very almost sculptural engagement with the book.
And is that something that you plan ahead? Do you create a thumbnail guide to how you're doing it, or is this just organically you're designing it as you go along?
I wish it were more organic than it is, but I have a pretty geeky system where I actually do all my writing in Adobe Illustrator. So I'm writing, I'm typing on my keyboard, but I'm arranging my text in little panels on the screen. I'm already treating the page as a two-dimensional field.
Fascinating.
And
That's
and I'm
amazing.
imagining what I'm going to be drawing in those panels as I write, because I have to. The story is driven as much by the images as the words, or maybe like 60% words, 40% images. But I still have to, I'm not actually drawing, but I'm thinking visually as I write.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to explain.
So you're creating a visual outline of the book with the writing first.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes I'll, drag an image off the internet, or I'll do a quick sketch to figure out a scene that I'm drawing, but mostly I don't really have to draw much. It's just all, it's like an outline with no pictures. It's words and no pictures.
And just to give people a sense of just, a time frame. So how long would you say that it took you to write this book before you started creating the images, the illustrations for it?
This book took quite a long time. Took me 8 years from starting it to absolutely finishing it. And
wow.
I wasn't super actively working the whole time. My life got very busy and kind of interrupted for a while. So I wasn't actively working all the time, but it's funny because as a memoirist, I was still living my life. So in a way, it's just living my life as work. So I guess I was still working. But the writing took by far the bulk of that time. The research, the writing, and trying to figure out what the book was even about, because I didn't know. I never know what I'm really writing about until I'm like 2/3 of the way through something. I never learned how to make an outline. Like, that just never made sense to me. How can you know what the outline is until you know what you're doing? And how can you know what you're doing until you've done it?
Right. I mean, it sounds to me like it is just a long form outline. You're creating the architecture of the entire thing,
but it's not. I wish that were the case, and then I could like have a bigger, like a more bird's eye view. But I'm all in the tiny details of it. It's the actual book. It's every sentence has to get done before I can even think about drawing it.
Yeah.
And but I do. Then I.
No. You were saying.
Then I take those individual Illustrator pages and set them up in InDesign so it is like a virtual book on the screen. For people who don't know, that's what do you call it? I'm losing my words. It's a book.
So the layout page.
Yeah, it's like yeah.
And so once you have that, what was the time frame of the making of this book, of creating the art for it?
Well, I feel sheepish about this because I wish I'd finished the writing a lot sooner and had more time for the drawing. But I did, honestly, most of the drawing in the past, like in 1 year at the end of that period. Like, yeah, just very intense, long days of just drawing. Which was really fun. It's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
Is the drawing.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting that it's usually the thing that we don't have a lot of time to do? It's the thing that ends up being the crunch, which is the most, rewarding part of the process.
I know. I sometimes wonder if I'm somehow punishing myself or, sabotaging myself. Like, just start sooner. What is your problem?
Well, that's the existential question, Alison. If you figure this out, like you could accomplish a lot of things.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things the book is about for me, is just the ways I get in my own way, that I have always gotten in my own way, not just creatively, but in every realm of life, almost. Every realm except exercise, where I feel like that's like my conflict-free zone.
Yes, exactly.
George, are you an exercise person? Do you work out?
I am. I am now. I'm an outdoor exercise person. I play tennis. I ride my bike. I do yoga at home. But it is I was really admiring your dedication to it, because I haven't always been that. It seems to have been a lifelong curiosity in your life. That's actually one of the
Yeah.
questions that I had. How long have you been obsessively thinking about fitness and exercise? I was really amazed by that your continual dedication over the years.
Well, yeah, it's something I kind of stumbled on when I was 14. I found my mother's exercise book. And because I had just been out sledding with my brothers in the snow, and all of a sudden when I turned around from coming down the hill and looked back up the hill, I just felt like, oh, I'm so tired. I can't go up that hill. But, all my childhood, I had this boundless energy. I would just run back up the hill. It never occurred to me to be tired. So I decided I wanted to do something about that. And I kind of never looked back. Like, I started this calisthenics program, then I started running, and it just made me feel so good.
Mm-hmm.
and gave me some kind of, I don't know, just space to myself that was really important to me as a kid in a kind of nutty household. It kind of
Mm-hmm.
saved me.
Mm-hmm. One of the many things I'm impressed with this book over is that the introductory point is a personal story, but you really utilize the story to inspect and critique how American culture has evolved with, this kind of self-focused betterment, like using exercise as a way to enhance our understanding of ourselves. And you chart the evolutions of that over the decades. And I was struck by how, when you first started this, I mean, really there was just Jack LaLanne, and
Yeah.
and then you're having to really kind of face all of that misogyny and all of that. Was that something you were aware of as you were growing up, or was that something that you got to look back and thread the continuity of that?
No, I was always really pissed off as a little girl at this whole like constant thing about how girls are weak and girls can't run and girls can't throw. It drove me crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
maybe that was the real origin of this book, just kind of like, it's just been simmering for a long time. So that was part of that whole bodybuilding fixation too. I wanted to be big and tough like that guy who could like kick sand back at the bully.
Mm-hmm.
That was my goal.
Yeah.
But I've gotten more mature now.
I was back to the making of the book for a second. As you were just speaking, I was thinking about how much color plays a role in the understanding of this book. And I do understand that this is your first book in color. And I was curious about what your relationship to color is. Why did you decide to make this book color when your previous one had been mostly black and white grayscale?
I have a very interesting relationship to color. My father kind of terrorized me about color. He loved color. He would color in my coloring books. He'd show me how to do it better. I mean, can you imagine?
That's too much pressure.
It was. So at a very early age, I all children are so drawn to color. It's so fun picking out the crayons and the watercolors. But I lost interest in color because of my father's just like overbearing attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And he was always trying to encourage me it was great to have a parent who was encouraging my art, but it can be too much as well.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, I wasn't aware of this as a kid, but I do think that I kind of became a cartoonist because it was a black and white art form.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have to think about color.
Right.
And this was way back in the 80s. It was the pre-digital era.
Yes.
So color was quite elaborate and expensive and just not something that cartoonists generally got to do.
Did you decide that you were going to make a book in color? Was that part of the original mandate of the book, or was that something you evolved into?
I wanted to do color. I had gone from doing all black and white when I was drawing my comic strip, Dykes to Watch Out for many, many years in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. And in the 2000s, I also started working on Fun Home, my first like standalone book, this graphic memoir. And that I was envisioning as black and white the whole time I did it. But in order to ever finish it, I knew I had to do something quicker than the kind of cross-hatching, this like minute little detailed cross-hatching that I was using in my comic strip. So I used ink wash to shade it. Mm-hmm. And the book designer said, you know, we can turn that shading a color. We can make that a tint. I had done it all in gray. And so I was a little hesitant because I felt like I was afraid to go into that world of color, you know. Mm-hmm. I was still like kind of afraid of my dad. But when I saw how it looked, I was like, oh man, that's great. Yeah, let's do that. And then I did something similar for my next memoir. It was like a spot color and gray wash. Mm-hmm. So each time it got a little more complex, and I just felt like it was a natural evolution to do something really different and full color. Mm-hmm. And I knew that would be a lot of work. I don't honestly know how cartoonists do it. It's crazy.
Yes. And this is just a art nerd production question, but were you happy with the results just from your soul looking at the finished product? Was it what you had envisioned?
Yes, I wish I had more time to go back and perfect everything, but I am quite happy with it. And I actually didn't even do the color. My partner pitched in because there's just like no time. I dilly-dallied so long with the writing. The deadline was coming, and Holly is a painter, so I knew she could do this, although we'd never worked together, and I had never collaborated with anyone, so that was interesting.
Yeah. I was really fascinated by that because the process that you do is so internal and solo. You know, you are making this thing mostly by and unto yourself. And so what was that process like collaborating with your partner on what is an already really personal story?
Yeah. Well, I tried to control it as much as I could. I came up with this technique that I felt would be like, I'll just tell her what areas to make what color, and then she'll do it. But of course, I ended up having to turn over a lot more control to her, and she just had to make her own aesthetic choices, which was great, but an interesting learning curve, because that also was sort of one theme of the book, you know, how I need to learn to let other people into my life. I need to learn that I need other people. I can't do everything myself. So it was borne out in this very interesting graphic way.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious if after making the book, having it released, talking about it, are you interested in exploring more color yourself? Is the next step painting your own finished works in color?
You know, I think it would be fun to keep collaborating with Holly. We're talking about maybe doing some children's books together.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think it would be fun. She just has a really different brain, and we do a thing together where we plan our week together, like on Sunday, and she tells me a thing to draw. This is like a little exercise she started some time ago. I didn't realize this, but she was trying to get me to start drawing, like to get my gears moving for this project. And I would always end up first resisting her and balking and complaining, but then making a drawing that I really had fun with and liked, and it would be something I never would have thought of myself. So we have a fun energy together.
That's wonderful. That seems really clear that you that you also like spending time with your partner. That comes through in in the book. And
Yeah.
and as you say, as someone who is resistant to relationships, that you are also drawn to them at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
I
I'm
understand.
difficult.
um, I am I was curious about so many aspects of this book. I actually read it twice because I got to take in, as an artist also, I look at the engineering of things. So I was just fascinated by how beautiful this book was, and I was looking at it from a purely aesthetic perspective. But then I also went back in and really studied the themes that you explore. You explore a lot of layers in this book. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna kind of ask you one thing at a time, but I'm just setting up the next group of questions that I'm gonna be asking. Um,
I feel like I'm sitting for my orals.
it's gonna be a lot easier than that.
Okay.
Ah, um, well, let's talk about the gay thing first. So
Okay.
the gay parts first. Like, I'm a gay man, and I was reading fascinated by you having a gay father, by you really exploring your sexuality in college and really kind of coming and moving through different relationships and finding yourself in a relationship now that you are really kind of settled and grounded and stimulated by. That there's a lot of gayness that you explore in this book also. And my question for you is it something that you're exploring because you understand what you want to say, or are you exploring because you are searching for answers? Did that make sense?
Yeah. No, I feel like I am always searching for answers.
Mm,
I'm always trying to figure something out when I'm making a story about my life. I mean, I sort of, I have written a lot about my coming out years. I've certainly written a lot about my father, but still, I'm still putting my whole like queer identity in into the context of my whole life. Like in this book, I was trying to write about my whole life,
mhm,
which is
mhm.
very hard to do in like 225 pages.
It's very
Um,
ambitious.
well, yeah, I mean, I had to leave a lot out. That's why it took 8 years, because I had to like fill it up and then get rid of like 3/4 of it,
Yeah,
because it just didn't fit.
yeah.
So I was trying, I guess, to just understand, you know, my whole relationship history, which necessarily gets into, my lesbianism
Mhm,
and my family.
mhm.
It's just all mixed up together.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing I was really struck by was that I read it the first time and then realized that the book was also a love letter to your mother, and that your mother had played a much larger role in the telling in your stories, and of which you yourself started realizing as your mother was dying. And so, if you can talk a little bit about that process, just kind of contextualizing your relationship with your mother in the telling of this story.
Sure. My mother was just such a character, a real character. She was, as a mother, kind of remote, kind of distant, and always like, I just always wanted more of her, more connection. But she was an artist. Both my parents were artists, and somehow imparted that to me without ever really sitting me down and saying, here's how you write a paragraph, or here's how you draw, you know, a landscape. I just kind of absorbed it from both of them.
Mhm,
But my mom really taught me a lot about writing. She was just a very principled person. And acted all through my life. She would do summer stock, and I could see her like in her own relationship to her own creative life all the time. Like it just set this example for me.
Mm-hmm.
So it was weird when she started to die. You know, she got cancer in her 70s and spent like 7 years just dealing with that and slowly getting a little sicker and sicker. And she died just before I began work on this book, or right about the same time I started work on the book. So in a way, the book I was working on it through this whole period of grief, you know, and I think that's another reason why it took so long. And it was very strange, a strange kind of grief, because my mother was like never quite there anyhow. So it was curious to miss something that wasn't there, you know.
Right.
It just made it more complicated, I think.
Right. And one of the lines that you said that really struck me was you didn't realize how much she had loomed over your life until she was dying, until she was about to leave. You know, that death can recontextualize, can radically shift all of our perspectives about our everyday lives.
Yeah, I mean, I knew my mother was dying. I kept trying to brace myself for it and practice for it. I would talk to friends whose parents were dying or had died and try to like, how do people do this? But there's no way to practice until it happens. And there was no way to understand how much space she had taken up until she was gone. It's like when a tree gets taken down, you cannot imagine beforehand the void that's going to be there. There's no way to prepare for that.
Absolutely. You also speak, and it weaves all throughout the book, is your critique of societal gender norms and just how pervasive it still is. It just coats American life, and it's so invisible that we don't even think about it, you know? And what I love is that all throughout the book, from the start, you are staring at how fitness and, you know, and exercise is packaged, and it just kind of slots into, you know, boys do this and girls do that. And you know, what's your view of where we are right now? Because you critique it all throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts, and where we are now.
I feel like, honestly, it's gotten a lot better. I feel very excited. I was just watching this commercial was on TV the other night. It was a little white boy watching a black woman athlete. I don't know, she was a boxer or something. She won her match, and the little boy was like staring at her with awe and admiration. And he began doing his own like workout routine because he's admiring this woman. It was so cool. That would not have happened, right, you know, not even 10 years ago, I don't think. So right. I feel like some real sea change has happened. And I think it has a lot to do with the evolution of the sports bra.
That's pretty great. I mean, I wouldn't know about that, but I'll take your word for it.
I mean, one thing I'm interested in the book is just the evolution of technology in athletic gear, and, you know, these little developments that make whole new things possible, like waterproof boots. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. And I love that you point out these minute changes that affect how we all exercise. That technology has actually enhanced our ability to get even more specific about how we exercise out in the world.
Yeah, I had quite a revolution when I got a Fitbit back in like 2014. It really was amazing to me to realize how little I moved anymore, you know? I mean, everyone got a Fitbit and everyone had this realization, but it really changed my life. And it actually led me to take up running again, which is something I had done when I was younger and really quit doing.
Yeah. And I used to be a runner also. I was a runner in high school and a little bit in college, and then I stopped. And it is one of those exercises that I don't know many people who have just continued to do it. It's a relationship that you are in and then you take some time from. And I was
Yeah.
really, it was really fascinating and wonderful to see your own relationship to running and how you and why you took some time off and how you came back into it. I loved that aspect of the book also.
Did you do it competitively?
I did. I ran track in high school.
Wow.
And, the whole competitiveness in high school is just a fascinating subject. Like you just learn about the primal aspects of competitive, like humans, how we compete with each other.
Uh-huh.
It's like all that playground stuff that stays with you forever.
Yeah. I feel bad I never did sports as a young person. I mean, I did my own things, but I didn't ever play sports. So I
Hmm.
feel sort of sad I missed out on that.
Hmm. So the aspect of the book that I was really like, I went back to read it a few times, is the relationship that you have to people like Margaret Fuller and Ralph Waldo Emerson and Jack Kerouac. Tell me a little bit about why you decided to interlace these stories into your stories.
I liked the way these people, it started with Jack Kerouac, because I always loved his book, The Dharma Bums. I loved this hike he went on with Gary Snyder. I just always found that kind of magical, the way they would just talk about Zen and the universe and just the way people talk together when they're moving through nature. Um, and I knew that there was something about transcendence in this story that I was trying to get at. I didn't really know what transcendence was. I still don't. I think it's a beautiful word. I've always been interested in the transcendentalist just because what a cool name, what a great thing to call yourself.
Uh-huh.
Um, so it was an excuse to then see who these transcendentalists were and what were they about. And Margaret Fuller just blew me away. Like I only learned about her pretty recently in my life, but she's this really powerful historical figure that
Mhm.
did not get her due. I hope that she's going to start getting more attention
Yeah.
because she was amazing, and she was friends with Emerson. They worked together, and
So how did you decide on these figures? Like who are they to you in adding them, and they feature pretty prominently all throughout the book.
they do. I mean, so they were all talking about the self and transcending the self in some way, which is what I wanted to learn about in this book. And then there was also the British romantics, Wordsworth and Coleridge, and they too were hanging out in nature and having these kind of quasi mystical experiences. So I saw this lineage, and they were also all like hippies, They're all these countercultural people, like very anti-establishment, very they had very progressive politics. Well, I don't think Emerson or Fuller were actually vegetarians, but some of those transcendentalists, they had like vegan communes,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
in the middle of the 19th century. So it
Pioneers.
just what?
Pioneers.
Yeah. So I just felt like this kind of connection back through time to this
Uh-huh.
whole school of thought. These people thinking about nature. They were very influenced by Eastern philosophy, and then I got very interested in their actual lives and how they managed their lives and their work, and when it was going well for them and when it wasn't, and what their addictions did to them. And I just found all of their individual life stories really entrancing.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what is your draw to the memoir um, format of storytelling? Like what is it that you mine the stories of your own life? Tell me a little bit about why.
Honestly, I think I just have this sort of compulsion to keep track of my own life. Probably, on some primal level, it's because I felt like no one was like paying attention to me or giving me the kind of care I needed, blah, blah, blah. but how it has manifested is I'm going to take care of myself by just making sure I write down everything I do. And then I'm going to like make a book out of that and think about it. And it feels like kind of neurotic. Honestly, it feels like just a big neurotic, obsessive impulse that if I were really like mentally healthy, I wouldn't have. I would just like sit here quietly in a state of bliss and I wouldn't have to make anything.
Right. That's amazing. So in writing memoirs, you're obviously writing stories about other people also. You're telling the stories of your perception of your parents and your family and your brothers. How does your family feel about you telling their parts of their lives also?
Well, that's been like a long process. I mean, my father didn't have any say in it. He was dead when I started writing his story.
Right.
But navigating that whole thing with my mother, telling my mother I'm going to write a book about our family, about dad, about what happened, that was very difficult. And I feel like my mother engaged with me very gamely. She understood my artistic, my sense that this was something I had to do, and she honored that, even though it made her uncomfortable. She never told me not to do it. And I know it made her uncomfortable. I wrote a whole other book about her, even after she'd gotten diagnosed with cancer and was, having to deal with that in her life, as well as her daughter writing a memoir about her. I mean, really. But so I've done a lot of work figuring that stuff out. I try to keep my brothers out of it because I feel like
I was
it's fair.
Literally about to ask you about that, because I feel like those are the only two people that I don't have a real sense of in your life, are your brothers. They're you show them as young boys and you show them like briefly as adults. And I found myself thinking, who are these guys? I want to know more about them.
Yeah, I feel like it's fair game to write about your parents because they brought you into this world. But my brothers, are private people with their own lives, and I've already like written about their childhood, and it just seemed easier to keep them to a minimum. Like they're there because I had brothers, but I just didn't want to put that on them.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And it's a place of thoughtfulness when you're writing about people, and I can imagine the sensitivity of all the conversations that you have to get their approval, to get their clearance.
Yeah.
So, and I think you do a really great job of being really respectful of other people's stories. I sense that from how you talk about your mother and your father. It's clear that there is respect in even how you speak about the uncomfortable parts. Yeah. So we have a few audience questions for you. I love it. Are you competitive in sports, in work, in art?
I think I am so competitive that I can't compete. I mean, in terms of sports, like I can't bear not winning. And of course I'm not going to win in an athletic event, so I don't even try. I've run in some races and it's awful. I don't like being passed by people. If I go out on a bike ride, I hate it when people pass me. I'll try to speed up and go as fast as I can to avoid it. I guess I am competitive. I never really thought of myself that way, but I guess I am.
Yeah. One of the things that it took me like half the book to realize is that you focused on individual exercises. It's all very much the self. You know, even when you were out bike riding with your friends, it seems like they had to kind of coax you to join them.
Yeah, I've always been just fine exercising on my own.
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing. The next question we have, can you explain what the Bechdel test is? Do you think it is still relevant today? Would you add any other criteria if you were making it up now?
Okay, the Bechdel test is this funny thing that isn't something I really declared, but somehow has been ascribed to me. But in 1985, I wrote an episode of my comic strip, Dykes to Watch Out For, where two women were trying to figure out what movie they were going to go to. And one of them said, okay, I can only see a movie if it has at least two women in it who talk to each other about something besides a man. And me and my lesbian friends in 1985 just thought that was hilarious. Like, yeah, that's about right. There's no movies. It's crazy.
Right.
But over time, you know, just as I feel like there has been progress made. You know, the fact that this has become something that's discussed in mainstream culture is itself a sign of some, you know, shift in awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's pretty incredible.
It is. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah.
And it's funny having it attached to my name, but that's fine. I'll take it.
You know, it's really funny. I don't Google. I tend not to Google. I use Google, but I don't use it to Google people. And so I knew about the Bechdel test. I didn't actually know that it was through your own creation. I just assumed hadn't put it together. So that's incredible. That's amazing.
You don't use Google to Google people? Wow.
I don't Google people. No one believes me when I tell them that, because it's just, you know.
Wait, do you use a different search engine to look up people?
No, I just find it to be a black hole of, you know, despair. So I just
That's great.
Yeah.
I admire that.
A lot less drama in my life. Another question, what was it like to see your life dramatized in the theater version of Fun Home? Tell us about that.
It was crazy. It was great, but very surreal and strange. It was interesting too, because that all happened, that play happened right after my mother had died. And so it was like this weird way that my parents were kind of brought back to life on the stage. And it sort of got, I think my whole grieving process for my mother was kind of delayed or altered, because I would go to this play and there she would be, and there would be my dad. It was really cool.
Tell us a little bit about the process of that. Like, how did that all come together?
You know, right after Fun Home came out, soon after it came out, there was a theatrical offer to turn it into a musical, which I thought was just nuts. Like, are you kidding me? How are you going to do that? So I agreed to it just because it seemed like a strange art form I didn't really understand. A musical, okay, sure, go ahead and give that a try. Somehow it didn't feel like a risk. I was somewhat naive, you know. I didn't quite understand that it could have been a really terrible musical, and I was very lucky that it turned out to be as good as it did. So then part of the reason I said yes is because Lisa Crone, a playwright whose work I knew and admired, was going to write it. So I trusted that she would know what she was doing and would get it right, and she did. Mm-hmm. And so then she went off and worked on it, and there was all this workshopping and all kinds of people and layers of process, and years later, they made this play.
It's incredible. How long did it run for?
It ran for like a year and a half on Broadway.
That's great. That's wonderful. Another question, how do you find the balance between your love of exercise and your creative work? Often both require a lot of dedication and a lot of time.
For me, they're very interdependent. You know, I'll work and I'll get to a point in my day when I'm just like, my brain is fried and my body's stiff. And so it's time to go run, and it feels good. It feels fun to get to go do that. Sometimes I'm too busy. I can't always have that time, but mostly if my life is in reasonable balance, it's not hard. Like there's time to work and then there's time to go move.
Mm.
Yeah. I really enjoy exercise. This is something that's kind of like, it doesn't ever feel like a burden to me. It's not something I want to like do first thing in the morning so I can tick it off my list. Like I look forward to it, you know?
Huh. That's great. What is in thinking about this just complete package that you have right now, I'm sure that you are, you're asked this a lot, but is there a subject that you haven't tackled yet that you are interested in possibly turning into a book? And I'm not necessarily asking what's your next book project, but just kind of like, are there ideas out there that you are interested in exploring at a later date?
You know, I'm in this stage right now, having finished this book fairly recently. I have some ideas about what I want to do next, but I'm also in this very delightful, open state. And I'm always interested in how other artists know what to do next, which is like, I guess what you're asking me, but I don't know how that process works. I want to make sure, you know, I'm very conscious as I get older that I have less time. You know, this might be this next book could be the last book I write if I even have time to finish that.
That's pretty fatalist, Alison.
Well, I'm getting up there. I mean, no, I'm serious. Like at a certain point, you just start thinking, how much more time do I have to get stuff done?
Right. A question from our audience is there an exercise trend you hope will never, in all caps, come back? One that you wish could come back?
Huh. Well, I never had one of those thigh masters, so I wouldn't mind if that just disappeared, never came back. I think, you know, I think that whole aerobics scene was, I would never want to do that. And I think that it did damage to people's bodies. I think a lot of people just got really bad joint injuries from that. Also Insanity. I did that that DVD program with Sean T. That's super crazy. You shouldn't do that if you're over 40.
I love Sean T. Sean T.
Oh,
seems like
isn't
a character.
He great?
He is. And you captured his personality perfectly. Like I felt like I was hearing him bark orders in my ear.
I didn't know he was gay for a long time until like at a certain point in the middle of doing the whole, you know, 2-month program. I was like, huh. I think he's gay.
I think he's gay. And there's that queer thing where we know people are gay even when we don't know that people are gay.
Yeah.
And just even in the illustration, I was like, I know her.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for people struggling with parents who don't support their choice to pursue art as a career?
Wow, that is an interesting question.
An excellent question. Thank you, person who asked this question. It's an excellent question.
I mean, I am so fortunate. I grew up with parents who had come from working class backgrounds and were like the first generation to go to college. Well, second in my mother's case, but they weren't allowed to be artists. They had to get professional jobs, but they encouraged me to become an artist, which was amazing. So it's a very real concern. I understand how parents feel like they want their kids to like be able to make a living, and it's you know, it's a lot less likely that you're going to make a good living as an artist than as, you know, some regular job. So I don't know what to tell people. I mean, I think if you yourself are committed enough and driven enough, you're just going to do it. You're going to find a way to do it. But it's unfortunate that you have to also struggle against your parents. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, that's real. That's a real question, and that's a real answer too. Another question, can you talk about what it's like to make art while grieving?
I found it very painful. In fact, I think part of my grief process was a resistance to my work, because kind of what we were just talking about, my mother didn't ever get to really be an artist. Like, she had to be a high school teacher and do art on the side, and she wanted to write, and that didn't happen. So I feel like, in a way, when she died, I got kind of stuck in my own work because I felt guilty on some level. I didn't realize this at the time. It was only later when that feeling started to shift and move that I suspected that was part of it. Like, I was kind of punishing myself by not doing the thing I loved.
Wow.
Grief is so weird.
It's intense. It is intense. And I feel like we as a society don't have a lot of language for it. And I mean American society. I should be more specific. We don't thread and leave a lot of room for grief. And so it comes, I'm really grateful to artists like yourself that show that everyday process and how it just seeps into your life if you don't address it, and it eventually can just coat everything and you're not even aware of it.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a strand of the book too, is if you're not letting yourself experience grief, you're also not experiencing joy, and what kind of a life is that?
That is the realest talk right there. That is absolutely the truth. A couple more questions. Do you use exercise the way you imagine others might use mind-altering drugs? That's a funny question.
I've actually, as I've been out on tour and talking about this book a lot, some people have said to me, well, it seems like you're using exercise to like mask your feelings or sublimate this or that. I don't think I do. I don't think of it as a drug. I mean, it certainly works like a drug. It's like so much more dependable than any kind of antidepressant for me, like to go for a run. It just works. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't feel like I have any kind of addictive relationship to it.
That's great. And I think that's a good question to ask and understand within oneself, because we all have different reasons for exercising. There's the umbrella of, oh, it just makes you feel better and it's healthy and it's good for you. But then there are also the internal reasons that no one has access to except each of us.
Yeah. And also, I just want to make clear that I exercise because it's a thing that I like and that gets me to these states of mind that are helpful. I don't mean to be like an exercise evangelist at all. I understand that people have many different ways of transcending themselves or accessing flow. For me, it just happens to be running and lifting weights.
One more question. Have you ever suffered a creative block?
I feel like I'm constantly suffering a creative block. It's something I worry about a lot. Like I said, I don't have that ease of creative flow that I did as a child. Now it's all so much more conscious and deliberate. I feel like that's just something I'm dealing with constantly. I don't know, this sounds really kind of dismal, and it's not. Like, it's just the nature of the work. Like, there's always a good moment when I get out of the stuck place and into the flowing place. Like, it's just an interplay of those dynamics. You're kind of stuck and then it flows.
Yeah.
Oh God.
And how how do you move out of that? If you find yourself in that stuck place, is it something that exercise helps you to dislodge the block?
Exercise helps, but I think what I really love is just walking. I live in the woods, so it's very easy for me to go outside and follow a stream or go up the ridge, and just being outside in this, non-symbolic realm where I'm just not thinking about words. I'm not thinking about language. I'm just kind of being. That really helps. Also, I love sticking my head under waterfalls if they're flowing. That literal flow, I find, really can get transmitted directly if you let it happen.
One of the joys of this book is the several panels where your head is thrown into a waterfall on your walks. There's several of them, and it made me laugh out loud every time.
Those times I did that were directly correlated to breakthroughs I had in my work. So I highly recommend it. If you have a waterfall around, go put your head under it.
Put your head under it, everyone. So pandemic question, has the pandemic changed or challenged your creative process or your exercise habits?
I feel guilty saying this, but I've had a pretty great pandemic experience because I've just been locked down at home, drawing, which is the thing I love more than anything. And I was just very intensely, I spent a lot of it working on this book, like with Holly together, just the two of us here drawing and coloring. And it was amazing. It was like we had our own little monastery.
Yes. And I love there's a drawing of you and Holly as monks.
Yeah, with our little tonsures.
Aside from everything that we have talked about tonight, is there anything that you want the casual viewer, to know about this book before we close out our conversation?
I feel like this book is about change. It's a book about transformation and how to keep changing and growing in one's life. And if that interests you, you might like this book.
That is great. And the book, once again, is The Secret to Superhuman Strength. It is a fantastic book. Alison, it was such a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, George. It was a delight.
It was a real delight. Nice to meet you too. I'm a big, big fan. I was going to fangirl out, but I was like, you're just so delightful. So it was a pleasure. And thank you to
I hope I get to do this, see you in person sometime. That would be great.
I hope so too. The next time you're in San Francisco, I would love to.
I want to see your studio.
You. And yes, you can come out to the outer Sunset, to my studio where I'm located right now. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everyone who has listened.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you, City Arts and Lecture. You guys, amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.